there everyone, welcome back to On the Flip Side. My name is Adam Shawwalker, your host, and today we're going to be checking out this new self-titled album from Tiny Moving Parts. This is the 8th studio album from Tiny Moving Parts and one of the first that I've really sat down with for quite a while. I've heard a lot of tracks off of like Pleasant Living or This Couch is Long and Full of Friendship, but it was never something that I really went out of my way to listen to. If you're a guitar player like me, chances are one of the main reasons you're aware of this band is because of their habit of writing incredibly technical, detailed guitar parts that are an absolute nightmare to learn. So that's really been my main exposure. Tiny Moving Parts comes up often enough in musical discussion, especially about non-prog bands that have very technical playing. So one of the main reasons for me not really getting into Tiny Moving Parts was the general alt-rock, like pop-punkish vocal styles and song structures. And on that end of things, Tiny Moving Parts is generally a lot better about how they approach their writing and usually have a bit more of a sense of taste as well. Especially on this project, which while I usually wouldn't go out of my way to listen to a band like this, I can say I really enjoy some of the more lighthearted, poppy chorus work like on the track North Shore. And of course, they do still play with a lot of genre cliches, but I think that's almost an endearing thing in a context like this album. I mean, from like the very first moments of the record, the first track, Decibel, is very in your face with these soaring vocals and this really treble-heavy drum parts. It almost reminds me of that track Say This Sooner by The Almost, especially on the vocal end of things. I do really think there's a pretty short jump that could be made as well for a comparison to like Dance Gavin Dance as well. Though in this case, a lot of what I'm hearing on this Tiny Moving Parts album is what would happen if you kind of just took Dance Gavin Dance and just cut out like 90% of the bullshit and just left like a touch of the technicality over the top of some of the pretty stock but still very solid rhythm sections. Decibel of course leads into North Shore with its longing vocals and the incredibly pretty play between these sort of low-driven guitar parts and some very light, shimmery piano and staccato tapping guitar parts. Demons Are Taking Over builds further on the last two tracks, more really well thought out tug of wars between the guitar work and the vocals, which are at their most pop-punk heavy thus far, really dominate this track, which I'm not really the biggest fan of, but that's not because the vocals here are bad, that's just down to my personal taste. Tangled Up is one of the only tracks here that I'm really just not much of a fan of at all, past the, again, very well put together guitar parts. I do think it comes across a little bit melodramatic. I'm not really feeling this washed out vocal production on this song, which feels questionable, though it does make the chorus hit a little bit harder, but it is kind of negligible when it makes the rest of the song just sound so really easy to tune out. Jotting Notes definitely feels like it is the most nostalgic for like the golden age Midwest emo sound, which is very much in the DNA of this album, but this track is kind of just on its own really a standout moment for the sound and style of this album. It's kind of like I've been teleported back to 2009 and I'm about to check out this album on the iTunes store on my iPod Touch while I've barely managed to get connection to the Wi-Fi. Though past the nostalgia factor, there's not a ton going on for this track, but I do like the chorus. Downhill Spiral is more of a progression on the last song, bringing more of that late 2000s emo sound, kind of up to date, with some really full production, surprisingly like very beautiful soundscapes, and more modern flares, be it the guitar or the somewhat minimal production in the verses. I'm also digging the chunky bass tone on this track. It is one of the better things about this song. All My Guts starts off with another mind-warping guitar tap slide part that goes into a really solid track with a song that I think manages to do the pop-punk vocals in a way that I actually really enjoy them, which is kind of crazy because I have been tolerating most of these songs on the vocal side of things to this point. And I've got a bit of a bias. I've really never had much of a appeal to pop-punk. I never had much of a pop-punk phase, and these sort of post-hardcore vocals that are sort of clean, sort of pretty, and sometimes driven with these sort of half-forced screams very rarely tend to land well for me. But with that being said, I have been trying very hard to use this review as a bit more of an opportunity to kind of just not shit on this style. So yeah, with all that being said, with that in mind, I can get down with this track. Daydrunk kind of loses the momentum for me a little bit. I think the long-winded intro with just the guitar and the vocals, which slowly introduces a tambourine and these weirdly corporate-sounding pianos, just doesn't really sit well with me. And this track, it kind of sounds like it's gonna be on a Levi's commercial, which Bad Trip has some serious end credit vibes. As for tracks that land in the anthemic or iconic sound, this is definitely a track I could see being a crowd pleaser, and I mean, I think this chorus is definitely formatted for a sing-along. It is pretty good though, definitely one of the more memorable songs here. It does feel a bit like these tracks can get a little bit monotone over the course of the record, so the songs here that do stand out a little bit more really feel a lot more involved than the other less notable songs. The last track, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, feels like a final gasp for the technical side of things to come to the forefront of the track. And it's not like we're really getting tons of these crazy technical guitar solos or anything like that, but the delivery of everything, including some of the more hard to wrap your head around guitar parts, is just very, very tight. And this song also feels like kind of a second dip into that anthemic style, and this being the final track, that feels a little bit more appropriate, especially with the more cliche lines in the chorus of like, I'll never let you go, which, considering the genre, I mean, it's fine. Yeah, I mean, this album's got a lot of mojo. I think that a lot of the really impressive guitar work and the solid, tight delivery on every track is great, but it does have a little bit of a tendency to blur the lines between every track. I particularly enjoy North Shore as well as All My Guts. The other highlights though here, like Bad Trip or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, are good, but don't really appeal to me in the same way. Everything else though hits me on a spectrum of like pretty good to kind of not really hating anything here, just not stoked on the general lack of variety, which does tend to pigeonhole the sound of this album into a much smaller box with not very much room to work with. I do think Tiny Moving Parts are one of the more interesting modern indie rock or Midwest emo bands or math rock or whatever you'd like to call them. They're one of the more interesting bands that are out there right now. And while I don't think that they mesh with my taste very well, I can respect the output because it takes a lot of sounds that are very much at the forefront of these styles of music and blends lots of really inventive, lots of very intricate, really neat ideas into this mash, which kind of results in some really good material and other times results in material that is just kind of okay. But at the very least, the risks have been taken, they've been calculated, and even with an inconsistent payoff, I think these guys should have a lot more people paying attention to them. I do think this Tiny Moving Parts album is probably a 6 from me. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of this album in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe and check out my Instagram, my Reverb, and my Depop. Links to those are in the description below. Thank you all so much again, and we'll see you on the flip side.